Good morning, everybody. It's This Week in XR. I'm Charlie Fink. I'm here with my friend Ted Chilowitz, and today is June 10th, Ted?
June 10th. It is June 10th. We spent a week together at the Augmented World Expo in real life, wearing...
I must say, you're very charming in person.
You too,
That must
Charlie.
be
We had a
why
nice
you have
week
such a
together.
good job.
We had a nice week together. It was fun. We did a lot of interesting interviews, a lot of interesting people that were on site, and got to see a lot of tech. We put the Mojo augmented contact lenses right up to our eye and checked them out, and they are indeed real and they indeed work. So it was very impressive.
And today our guest, by the way, is Vicki Dobbs Beck, who's the executive in charge of ILMxLab, which made the legendary Vader Immortal and its sequels. So it'll be great to catch up with her. Ted, you remember we were on a panel with her at the Infinity Festival in November.
Yeah, Vicki and I have been friends for a long time. I think you and I are both legitimate fans of her and all of the related work and IP that they're doing in exploration and experimentation. So she's always good to talk to. It'll be a good conversation.
So we'll look forward to bringing her in a few minutes. First of all, this week exceeds only last week in kind of weirdness. Neil Stephenson is launching a new company. He's got Tony Parisi and Roni Abovitz mixed up with a fellow who I had not previously heard of, Peter Vestnes.
Yeah, in the crypto world, right?
Yeah. So they like our friends Matt Meisniks and company last at John Guetta, right before AWE said they too were starting a virtual location company of sorts. And this is what this apparently is, a virtual world or something based on blockchain that Neil is going to build out. Vaguely based on his vision, they posted a bunch of principles like they're going to be carbon neutral and users will control their data and so forth. So I think those things, both in their vagueness and their high ideals, without revealing an awful lot, seem similar to me because people are doing a lot of aspirational things now. And I don't think even they are sure of what the final form will be.
Yeah, I think that's correct. I think we're maybe entering the age of utopia and grand vision, where people see a lot of potential economic value in putting time and energy into these things. And of course, Neil and I are friendly and we talk, on a pretty regular basis, just like Roni, and we're all in this interesting little club together, right? So
I'm trying to get Neil to come on the show. So that would be a great special episode.
Yeah,
and of course, Roni will be back because he's, been angling for that green jacket.
He's got to earn his jacket, right? So,
so have you ever heard of Creata?
I have, and I'm trying to remember why
They were acquired by Meta last year.
Right, that's right. Okay, yes.
Facebook Gaming is relaunching them as a cloud-based service, and Zuck talked it up yesterday, and of course he mentioned the M word. So I have not seen this service. It sounds Roblox-like. Do you remember it?
Yeah, I do remember it, and that's you caused my memory sort of thinking to go, yeah, Creata. I remember there was a sort of, and obviously they just got absorbed into the machine and kind of went away. But now it sounds like they're bringing it back to life in some fashion. There's also news around Meta just strategically starting to pull back on a lot of these big sort of announcements that they've made and stuff, trying to kind of figure out what the reality is around what their talking points are. As these other companies like Neil's thing and other are starting to pop up and put themselves out into the world. So it's a kind of a fascinating time. I was reflecting backwards, like in the days of the earlier versions of the internet and major progress points where people saw this could be something really important. Was there a whole bunch of stuff that sprung out around like other things that were kind of like AOL at the time and people that were notable that were trying to pull something off, and then it just kind of went by the wayside? Do you remember anything like this? Was there another era like this?
Excited Home is the biggest example. Excite was an early search engine that found backing from cable companies who were struggling to understand what the front end of their new high-speed services would be. Would it look like AOL? Would it be their AOL? So that's where Excite got its funding. They were hiring hundreds and hundreds of people in Silicon Valley and really ramping up to be the internet AOL. Right. And I think the whole thing collapsed in the face of Google. and soon other services. And they just weren't prepared for that. That came out of nowhere and really just took down. It took down Yahoo search. And I think looking back on it, it was a much bigger event than we thought it was. But I think it kind of got them thinking a different way about what their front end was going to look like. And they held back on the investment. And remember, also 2000 happened. There was a huge dip, which this feels like it might be also.
That's kind of my point here.
Yeah, you can take the long view and say, well, that enabled a whole new internet to arise. So we live in interesting times.
Indeed.
But that also means great opportunity and cats jumping on your desk in front of the camera. I shouldn't have said anything because most people are on audio. Let's change gears a little bit and talk about Imverse. This is a company that they just raised $5 million for holographic conferencing. So the idea is that, you have we also saw this, there are a couple of versions of this. Portal is one.
Yes.
There was another one at 8. And there's several other ones. And they use different methods, either a box or absolute black and angled glass to make it appear that the speaker on stage is present. We've seen this done with effects and even on television. I believe we brought Puff Daddy or whoever it was that died.
Tupac.
Yeah, Tupac. Sorry, I'm so square and out of it.
Okay. Tupac at Coachella is the reference.
So this is clearly, but now they're trying to do it two-way.
Yeah,
that's the breakthrough.
Yeah, so these are still largely what we would call bespoke solutions. Now I'm very bullish on this, and I'm a big protagonist on the fact that we will be moving from 2-dimensional video to truly three-dimensional spatial video in various ways. I've invested in some startups around it. I believe in the thesis, because I come from the camera world and I know what multiple sensors can do. I've seen a lot of very privatized stuff that are building on this thesis of using multiple cameras and being able to track you so that you have the illusion of a holographic experience. There's a number of folks doing that. And then there are these, like you referred to, kind of theme park style effects use cases with what we commonly refer as to various Pepper's Ghost solutions and foils and backdrop, foredrop. What's interesting is when you use a game engine in combination with this stuff, you can generate real-time shadows and real-time sort of back fall off. And that's actually what creates the illusion of that three-dimensional experience. So we use this term holography, but it's not really holographic. The folks like Metastage and the Hype VR stuff and all the things that are actually doing volumetric capture are really on the advent of
right. But a real hologram would be not only volumetric capture, but you would view it with your naked eye.
Yes. And that's
impossible.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's trickery to it, right?
You could put out a very fine mist.
Yes.
And that's kind of what it looks like in the Star Wars thing.
Yes.
Is not a complete high def image, but a clearly volumetric presence.
Right. And the real practical sort of nomenclature for those in this business, we call them foils. They're actually these very, very thin screens that have a fair amount of transparency, but can actually get a projection image on them. And the illusion done in the right environment. The trick is it has to be done in the right environment. Everything has to be dark around it and the lighting has to be set and the viewing angle has to be correct. You can create a pretty compelling illusion. And there are companies doing this holography in all kinds of different ways. When it gets to video chat, I have definitely seen some things, that are taking us there, but it's still a little ways out.
So, my example, I don't know, we talked about this story, I think in 2017 or 2018. Do you remember this story I did on this? Because the University of Washington had put together what was essentially 3D soccer. And they did it by using the telemetry of the game and the position of the ball, but using essentially puppets or avatars, game avatars, for the players.
Right.
So we were watching a simulation of the game based on the game that's happening in real time.
Yeah.
And they put it in a tabletop and you could walk around it and it would just pop out and, the angle would change and there would be shadows. And they were essentially doing real-time rendering of a video game where, the avatars are maquettes being driven by data that's coming in from the game, because capturing a game volumetrically. Well, you and I remember a few years ago, Intel was trying to do this for the NFL, and it was like an army of trucks to capture, one scene in the end zone.
Yeah, that's what we call the horseshoe effect, where you can kind of move around. And they're actually have actually successfully implemented this in various ways. We actually were involved in a project with the Grease IP from Paramount that we did. You probably remember seeing that, where you could move around the actors and move around the dancing. It's all highly experimental, but interesting and valuable to bring to festivals and events and show people where the future's headed. It's a big part of what our lives are. It's not mainstream yet, but it will be someday, and someone's got to take those steps to get there.
Here's a great segue to the new Looking Glass 65-inch display. I think we both saw a private demo at AWE as well. The thing is mad expensive, but it's much easier to look at than the small displays.
Yeah.
And my God, seeing a movie on that thing would be mind-boggling.
Right.
So and also it's 8K.
Right. And that's
this
the
is a very,
difference.
very expensive pros-only TV, but my God, is it cool.
Yeah, but you make the point that 8K used to be not only just expensive, but completely out of touch for any normal consumer. Now, an 8K television is a high-end luxury item, right? And the ability to take that 8K array of pixels, split it into two 4K views, and then converge them, you actually get a pretty high-res deliverable on screens that can be almost any size now, because they're not that expensive. I mean, you're still talking 4x, 5x what a 4K TV is, but now a 4K TV is a Costco device at $2,000, right? So over time, these things get less and less expensive. And I think there's a real future to that. I think the idea of glasses, 3D without glasses, which has always been this kind of holy grail that never gets there, we're actually finally at a place where the technology can deliver on that. And that's an impressive state. And it relates to this holography concept, because the idea of creating a stereo effect may be the first step to pseudo holography, right? That it kind of feels like I'm there with you and it's not two-dimensional anymore. So it's an interesting progress bar. So
Looking Glass large-scale 65-inch display is going to be used at the Tribeca Film Festival. This Tribeca runs through the 19th. They have a very impressive immersive section that's going to be available in the museum for other realities. I think it's really cheap. It's like $5. If you're doing it online, you need a tethered PC. So good luck to them. I usually am there in person. It's in New York, and I used to, as you know, Ted, live there. We used to see each other there.
Absolutely. Yeah, I have some of our team in New York at Tribeca, and I'm actually in Silicon Valley. We're this week, so we're splitting up some time. But they'll get a chance to see that stuff in person that you and I saw last week, which is great.
Great. I see Vicki is in the green room. Let us bring her in.
Nice.
Hi there.
Hey, Vicki.
How are you?
Good. Welcome to the show. We're rolling now.
Excellent. Lovely to see you both.
We just dive right in. It's always good to see you. We were just mentioning that we're big fans of you and all that you are doing. So,
well, likewise.
I'm excited to hear what's going on at ILMxLab and how you've been since we were on stage at the Infinity Festival.
Well, it's been a really busy time. As you guys well know, there's been lots of conversation about the metaverse. And what's interesting, I think, for us is that obviously it means many things to many people. But I think for us, it's a lot about connected storytelling. And I think what are the new elements of that are, one, the presence of immersive technology. So there's a new storytelling canvas, literally, that we can take advantage of. And of course, that's what we've been experimenting with since, about 2013 or so. And the other thing is sort of looking at the ecosystem of experiences as that, it's taking a holistic view of experiences across platforms. For us, I think it's going to be, it will transcend physical and digital boundaries. So it's not a purely digital play. And so we've been thinking a lot about that. And we've also been doing a lot of investigation in AR storytelling. Like, what does that look like? What is compelling, especially with an eye toward, glasses, because it will fundamentally change when you're not holding a phone in your hand. So I would say it's been kind of a lot of experimentation and preparing for the next phase of our history, which will be, I think, about immersive storytelling as it has been, but I just think it's going to take on some new dimensions.
Yeah.
Have you met Mike White? He's the guy they put in charge of it. Yes.
Yes, I have. I knew Mike, for years, and I think he's really excited, and I think he approaches it somewhat similarly to what I was just saying, which is this is really a new canvas for storytelling.
And you just brought in someone else to work with him that was an Apple veteran, right? That was 12 plus years at Apple or so.
Yeah, I actually just read that too. I think his name's Mike Bozen.
Other Mike, yeah.
Yeah, and he came from Apple Arcade, I believe.
Yeah, so it's good. You guys are making progress, which we're all always excited about to see what's on the next couple of corners.
So what's interesting here is that Disney is the meta fiction, right? That's the meta story, is the Walt Disney story. And from that story, you have different portals, right, that you sort of fall into, if you will. So, you can walk into the Marvel universe, you can walk into the Star Wars universe, or, any of these other franchises that the company has developed, around its IP. You could jump right into Little Mermaid and swim under the sea. So that was always that's what I'm picturing, right? The main street where you have all these storefronts, and sort of you travel there just as you do in the physical place, right? Because Walt Disney was making a virtual world just using the technology they had in 1950s, where we were talking about Pepper's Ghost a few minutes ago before we brought you on, and, forced perspectives and the way, things are, Cinderella's castle, for example, looks huge at the beginning of Main Street.
Yeah.
The windows are tapered to make the street look longer. And all of those other techniques, in addition, of course, to performance.
Yeah, I think I feel really privileged to be a part of the Disney company, because I do think Disney is perfectly poised to, sort of lead the way in this next generation of storytelling. And, we talked about story living. It really is bringing all of these amazing worlds and characters to life in a new and different way. And again, that's part of why I think for Disney, it's going to be not purely digital, which I know it is for some of the ways people are approaching the opportunity. They're thinking of it as a digital play, but for us, it really does take advantage both of physical and digital spaces. And of course, connected storytelling is actually the legacy of Disney. But as I said, I think the new dimensions are going to be immersive storytelling, holistic design, so that they connect in a different way. And ideally, your experience in those worlds and with those characters will evolve, which as you move across and around the various experiences in a way that hasn't been possible before.
Yeah, I think, it's interesting you talk about the connected storytelling and bringing the physical and the digital and together. Have you had a chance, or have you talked to colleagues that have now started to experience what you're building with this pretty exotic, pretty high-end, multi-day Star Wars resort experience where you go into
That's
the world of
exactly
Star
what I
Wars?
was thinking of, Ted, because that's an example of story living. And apparently people love it. I've heard several people say that was well worth it.
I actually have heard the same. I haven't done it. I've talked to people who were involved in creating it. And it's really, even just the process of creation is fascinating, because they literally created a living world, and everyone has a unique experience. It depends on the choices that they make over the course of the 3 days. And their journey defines, how they felt about it. But what is amazing then is everybody's talking to one another about what their experience was, and how it was the same or different as other people's experiences. And I think that that is like there's a other social dimension too.
Why don't you just back up a step for the listeners that may not know exactly what we're talking about? Explain where it is, kind of like what you have to commit to do it, that kind of thing.
Yeah, it's called the Galactic Star Cruiser. It's a multi-day experience. I think it's 2 nights and essentially 3 days. And you are in the world of Star Wars. I mean, you literally, from the time you enter to the time you leave, it is as if you are in Star Wars, not in our world. And as a part of that experience, you do go to Galaxy's Edge in the parks. So you are experiencing digital, physical, connected storytelling over the course of these multi-days. I believe, now I haven't done it, but I believe you can choose how deeply you engage or not. But the people that really, I think, lean into the idea that you're in Star Wars and now I am a character or a person in that Star Wars world probably have the most fun experience. But in creating it, they really had to think about a story world. And again, when I say living world, it means there's multiple, intersecting storylines happening throughout that period. That's a monumental task, really. I don't think anything of that scope and scale has ever been done before. And for me, it's like the ultimate example of, immersive storytelling, or as you were saying, story living.
Yeah, I think one of the interesting,
right? It's a live action role-playing game.
Yeah.
I think one of the interesting things when we did, our day at Galaxy's Edge, which a lot of people now have had a chance to do, and correct me if I'm wrong or if this isn't still holding, but one of the things that I thought was really amazing, and it's a little nuanced thing, but the idea that when you go to the Rise of the Resistance experience, which is unbelievable, there is no physical line. There is no queue line per se. There's a virtual line where you get an indication that it's time for you to go there. So they're keeping you in the world and trying to keep you in this sense that it's not a theme park per se where there's a line. It's an experiential area that is as real as it could possibly be. So by taking the concept of seeing people in the line in that ride away and using digital technology to build upon that, you start to kind of add into that reality. And maybe that's a nuance. And I think they're still doing it, but I'm just curious if that's correct.
Well, I'm not positive. I was just down there for Star Wars Celebration, and I did do Rise of the Resistance, and there was a line. You weren't aware of the line, I think, you were aware once you got into the line.
Right, there is a line inside when you queue, but outside the experience, it's not like a normal
part
ride.
of the, yeah, exactly. And I think one of the things that's just fascinating about Galaxy's Edge is, again, it's the idea of a living world, and there are characters from Star Wars that move in through that world. And this funny thing, right when just before it officially opened, we went down there, and I forgot to warn my husband that there is this element of all of these characters that might engage with you, right? So he sits down on this at the edge of this fountain. It's a big round fountain, and there's nobody else sitting there. And this guy, dressed up as though he's in Star Wars, sits down right next to him, literally right next to him. And it's like one of those things which, why are they sitting right next to me? There's an entire round circle. And he leaned over to Steve and said something about like, I need you to hand this, off to someone else. And Steve's like, I'm sorry. And he didn't realize. And I afterward I go, I think that was, you were being invited to be a participant in this unfolding story. But it was really funny. So that piece of it, I think, is quite that I think is a little nuanced, as you were saying before, but it really makes that whole world feel like you have left our world and our galaxy, and you have gone to a galaxy far, far away.
Well, and I think the most important part of what you're talking about broadly is that Imagineering is a living, breathing thing at Disney. It is kind of this DNA core that gives the time and the breath to experiment with things many times for years and years before it'll ever see the light of day. And a lot of things that won't actually see the light of day or morph into other things that see the light of day. But just that sort of understanding of the Disney logic of build it, see if it works, see if it resonates, see if it creates enchantment, and then bring it out. I think Disney probably does that better than anybody because they've built it into the core of their company's values, right? Like to try these things. And you have a whole division of the company that does that.
I think I'm obviously not alone in having huge admiration for Walt Disney Imagineering. And in fact, in many ways, they're an inspiration for us at ILMxLab because we are trying to do the same thing to an extent, which is really experimenting to create first of kind experiences using immersive technologies. One of the interesting things that we did is we made a conscious choice early on when we were founded in 2015 to almost experiment in public, meaning that we share our experiments with the community, with the industry. And we did that because we felt that it was such a new space that it would be good to have a conversation and to be able to learn from one another. And that is a little bit different than Imagineering, right? Because Imagineering, to your point, they come up with these ideas, they might develop and bake them for years before they ever see the light of day.
So it's almost a new flavor of Imagineering, sort of like your flavor of Imagineering.
I'd love to
Digital
believe that.
Imagineer. Virtual reality Imagineer.
Yeah, exactly.
Amazing.
Virtual Imagineers.
So what can we talk about that you're working on? You mentioned you were doing things with AR, you were thinking about AR. What can you tell us about what's coming up from ILMxLab?
Well, unfortunately, I can't say very much about what we're working on, but I can speak a little bit more generally about things we're interested in. And, we have we've always tried to work both in location-based entertainment and in-home experiences, and they offer different opportunities for storytelling. Before we had, the Galactic Star Cruiser, location-based entertainment tended to be, you could deal with scope and scale. You weren't beholden to consumer hardware, et cetera. So you could do things you can't do in the home. But in the home, you of course have the opportunity for extended engagement, right? You can spend many, many hours, experiencing stories. So I think we will continue to be interested in both of those spaces, so in home and in locations. The other thing that I think is really, really interesting is what we call next gen film and streaming, right? What do these technologies mean for theatrical or television experiences? And we have shared in the past. We try to do one of the ways, one of the tools I guess we use for experimentation is visualization, right? Just doing quick. It's sort of crude oftentimes, but you still get the understanding of what the aspiration might be. So early on, we did some experiments and visualizations that we shared about using these technologies with theatrical experiences.
So let's back up then. If we can't talk about the future, let's talk about the projects that are out there today.
Okay.
I always show my class Vader Immortal because it continues to be really the first and only example of inhabiting a movie as a character.
Yeah.
I mean, you have to structure the situations very specifically for characters that talk to you, but you don't need to respond. But clearly that's going to change. In fact, there was technology at AWE that, showed how AI could have a quote unquote conversation with you. So Vader Immortal, very, very important VR experience. But as you say, experimental in many ways, the first of its kind, leaving a lot of room for perfection. So I'm interested how it's perceived by you and the team that worked on it inside of ILMxLab? What is the general consensus of what worked, but also how do you feel it can be improved other than with maybe AI characters?
Well, I'm really proud of Vader Immortal. I'm proud of it for a lot of different reasons. One was it was a huge leap of faith in many, many different ways. You know, we had to innovate in almost every regard in order to create that. And we had a really great partner in Oculus, you know, now Meta, MetaQuest, but they too took a leap of faith with us because it was really immersive storytelling at its core, as opposed to being a game. And everybody, I think, intuitively felt that the early adopters of these devices were going to likely be avid gamers. So I was proud of it just for it actually coming to life, but I'm also quite proud of the end result. And one of the things that happened in that process, and we learned along the way, we started by thinking that you were going to be an observer, that the story was going to unfold around you, and that you were essentially a ghost. And one of the things we realized is, because we were developing everything, you know, in CG and in real time, we really weren't taking advantage of the opportunity for interactivity. And we realized that the difference between an experience in VR and watching a movie, for example, is that this is your story. And you know, even though Darth Vader was like this, probably the most iconic character in the Star Wars universe, the journey was really important, and your unfolding relationship with Vader was what made it very special. So we learned that in the midst of development. And we did a test, actually, because we knew that it was going to be really, really important to be able to connect with Vader, feel like he was really with you and in your that you were together in that world. And so the test actually is largely in the final product, which was the scene where you're in the cell and the door opens at the far end, and Vader walks toward you. And it's like that heavy breathing and the footfalls, and he comes up and he looks directly at you, which he can do, right? Which we can make happen in VR. And in the original test, David Goyer had written some dialogue, and he delivered the dialogue, but nobody heard it because they were so overwhelmed with his presence that I think it was more than they could absorb. So that for us really reconfirmed that this was that you could have a connection with characters in VR. You know, our team comes from a history with ILM and Skywalker Sound. So, you know, they're always visually, we'll constantly want to push the boundaries there, especially as the tech advances. We want to make it as close to cinematic as possible. And I think that we did a good job working within the limitations of the device. One of the things that's interesting about it, and I don't know exactly what to take away from it, but you know, the story was so important to us that we treated the experience not like a traditional game. Like, you couldn't die, you couldn't get stuck. You would literally fail through if that happened. And my personal opinion is that VR is only beginning to reach a broader audience, that there's a much broader audience that will be interested in VR over time. But they may be the kind of people who, rather than, you know, spending all their time playing games, might be the ones that are watching television or film, but are a little bit more, you know, tech forward. And so I think there's I would like to more deeply explore what the next evolution of an experience like Vader is, for that audience. Because one of the things I had to personally learn is I just stopped reading all the reviews. I mean, we got great reviews overall, but there were some people who approached it as though their expectations were for a game. So it was too short.
Yeah.
It was, they didn't like the fact that that you couldn't die, things like that. And so I think you have to, at some point, be clear on your audience and who it is that you're creating this experience for, and design accordingly.
You followed it up, interestingly enough, with a game.
Yeah. And so it is interesting because if you think about it, if there's a spectrum, right? And, linear entertainment's on one end of the spectrum and a AAA game is on the other end of the spectrum. I'd say we tend to work in the first, in the half between linear entertainment and halfway down the other. And definitely Tales from the Galaxy's Edge was edging more in the direction of a game. And we really wanted to, see what that kind of experience offered us from a storytelling and an experiential perspective. As you know, the purpose of that project was to extend the world of Galaxy's Edge and Black Spire Outpost. It was to enable you to go beyond the boundaries of Black Spire Outpost and experience the wilds of Batuu, because there was a whole amazing wealth of story and thought that had been given to the whole planet, not just the part that was built out. And one of the things that obviously VR offered is the ability to create things that couldn't be done, for reasons of laws of physics or cost or both. And so, for example, we had a Jedi temple, and that just could never have. I don't think it could have cost effectively ever been built at that scope and scale. And then we were also able to, deal with it in two different time frames, in the present and then in the past. The other thing we tried to do with that project is we were trying to sort of thread the needle between almost mission-based experiences and what we were calling legends, which were more story-driven. And I think it was just a really interesting approach to try to do both. I mean, it really was a sort of a living world, and you could experience story through the legends, and you could experience more traditional, almost game-like missions, but both were included in the experience. And the thing I learned there was it was a really interesting device to be able to. Cecil Slack was the bartender. That the cantina was sort of the hub, and the story was that this is a little bit of the dive bar in comparison to Oga's Cantina, which is down in Galaxy's Edge and highly successful. But Cecil Slack was your transition into the legends, and because he was in essence telling you these stories, which you were then experiencing firsthand, it allowed us to deal with different timelines. Within the Star Wars universe, we didn't have to stay in the present. We could, because it could have been a legend about the past, and it also allowed us to play a little bit with tone. Because again, it was a legend and they were almost discrete inside of this larger experience. So I really learned a lot from just thinking about it in that way. Like, how do you develop creative constructs that give you that kind of freedom and yet still feel authentic to Star Wars and to the universe?
Wow. Well, that was a very, very interesting discourse. Thank you so much. Things we did not know about Star Wars and the challenges of developing it. But I expect we'll probably see, given the success of those titles, hopefully we'll be seeing more of them in the future, because I do think Star Wars, especially among all of the IP that Disney controls, it is the one where you know who you are, you know where you are, and you know basically what you're going to do there. So, no one has to explain the alliance to them. No one has to
Right.
explain the empire. All of that is, because there's nothing worse than explaining this, and
Yeah.
especially explaining something complicated. I think if there was a critique I would have of Vader Immortal, is that it was a little hard to follow the backstory of what happened to the people and
Yeah.
the queen and the diamond. And, even there, you weren't asking a whole lot, but it is asking a whole lot if you're not familiar with the world and that sort of style of storytelling. In other words, that's the kind of story that takes place in the universe of Star Wars.
Yeah, as we know, the story canon matters a lot, right? So
Right.
when people come to it with expectations, as you mentioned, Vicki, you can get lots of positive comments and you can also get a lot of criticism because everyone has built-in expectations of what their version of this should be. And if it doesn't hit on all marks, people get frustrated. But there's lots of different audiences, and you're absolutely right that the biggest part of the audience in the growth perspective is not the hardcore gaming folks that expect these kind of gaming mechanics and these kind of gaming sophistication. That's a well-known area and a well-known customer, but the growth areas are outside of that, right? So that's kind of what we're both on the same page there. Absolutely.
There's a very successful Star Wars game on PC, which is a flight sim, a space flight simulator. So that's really for hardcore gamers. A regular person would, the acquisition of mastery would completely drive them mad. So
there's plenty of that in traditional platforms, right?
Yeah, there's this big audience that comes to Quest for the first time, and they're not gamers, and I think that's what makes the Star Wars so welcoming.
Well, I think the other thing that's going to be really interesting is the more there's gesture-based, where you can, you don't need a controller, where you can actually do things with your hands, so it's more intuitive. Because I'm always intrigued when I watch someone who hasn't done VR before, and sometimes, like, we had a demo that only required you to have a controller in one hand, and they inevitably want to grab things with the hand that doesn't have the controller in it. So again, myself not being a gamer, anytime you have to start using you have to use all of the different buttons, etc. It's just a little bit of a barrier for people that aren't used to it. Yeah.
Yeah, it can take you out of the experience when you have to focus on the mechanics of what do I need to do next. And for all of us as storytellers, first, you're trying to remove those elements. You're trying to make it feel very natural, things you would just do with your eyes and your hands and your body language. And those cue points of characters in virtual reality reacting to you without you having to push a button to make that work adds to the magic of it. It feels more real. And that's kind of why what you're doing is pretty valuable. It's great. I know we're spending a lot of time. You have to be one of our regular guests.
I know our half hour went by like that.
Yeah, we can't go through everything. It takes too long. Yeah.
So
well, it's always very fun.
All right, great. Well, we'll have to. It's taken us 6 months to schedule this, so hopefully it won't take us 6 months before we see you again in the real. Vicki Dobbs Beck, head of ILMxLab. Thanks for spending time with us this morning, and have a great weekend, everybody.
Bye, everybody.
Thanks so much. Bye.